As we go against your own narrative, would that be fair? Yahya Sinwar, you were lauding him as a hero.
Come on. What is up, team? Rory Mute here, as you know. This is something new I'm doing. Remember, I told you I was going to be starting to do some new videos. So do please subscribe to my channel on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you see this video. It will really help me out and hopefully get a bit of value out of this. So, Piers Morgan. I've been watching a lot of Piers Morgan, okay? A lot, because he gets a lot of dissenting voices on. I think he's a reasonably straight shooter. He has a good track record, and he's moved into the world of uncensored and away from, I don't know, it wasn't Fox News or something like that. And he popped up around the time that, Israel started butchering Palestinians in response to a horrific terrorist attack. Now, I'm going to start right here by saying, because this is a very regular question that Piers likes to raise, do I condemn the acts of Hamas on that day? Yes, I absolutely do. They are disgusting. They should never have happened, and there is absolutely no reason or excuse for behaving in that manner. Okay? It is barbaric, and it shouldn't be done. We shouldn't live in a world where something like that exists. So yes, I do condemn Hamas for what they've done. So one of the things that really irritated me about Piers Morgan at the start of watching all his videos around this situation was that particular point where he couldn't move past that question, and the guests he was having on were just failing to understand that they were getting held up by one thing and not getting through the rest of the interview, because Piers would always revert back to that. And we had sidestepping, justification, very few direct answers. And for me, people who do that because they don't want to condemn something outright or whatever it may be, just ruin their whole interview and just give him all the rope to hang them with. So anyone who's on a Piers Morgan show, right, if someone asks you, do you condemn the acts of Hamas on that day, just say yes and move on. Anyway, it seems like common sense to me. Now, I've been watching a lot of Piers Morgan stuff. I've been really enjoying the the complete and utter delusional meltdown of the left in regards to getting absolutely obliterated in the election, with Donald Trump taking a clean sweep of everything: the Senate, the House, popular vote, etc. I did say it was going to happen. In fact, the first time that Donald Trump got elected, no one really seemed to think he was going to get elected. Definitely all of my family didn't think that he was going to be elected. No one did, really. And I wrote an article about it just after Bernie Sanders was, basically taken down by the Democrat National Committee and by Hillary Clinton and her friends, who are psychopaths. I did find it funny at the time that a woman that represents the patriarchy, she's almost the very symbol of the patriarchy, was going to be breaking glass ceilings. But this is what happens when people are completely delusional and are suffering from something called mass formation psychosis, which I'll do a separate video about. But today I want to have a look at just going through this Dan Bilzerian interview, because I watched it and I thought this was a really, really strong interview. I felt like Piers was caught out a little bit here almost shocked. But he tends to come around. Anyway, so I'm just going to kind of watch this with you guys, and hopefully you guys will get something out of it, and I'll make some commentary along the way. I'd love to hear your comments in the comments section. Everyone is welcome here. We're going to keep it, super real, but super respectful. If you're from the left, if you're from the right, if you're an anarchist, if you're a communist, whatever it may be online, I think we should treat each other with kindness. I am definitely a culprit of not doing that at times, and it doesn't work, right? The minute you're not treating someone with kindness and you're not telling them that they are heard, there's just no point to the conversation, because you're not going to get anywhere. Now, this is a super controversial interview, depending on where you are on the spectrum of the Palestine and Israel war. But I think that it's definitely an interview that everyone should watch, and so I'm going to do that with you now. So let's move past all the intros and stuff and go straight to getting Mr. Morgan and Dan Dan talking. Should be around here, I think. Where is it?
So this looks like the mother of all rallies. Many stock markets.
The one you have now. So my first question, beautiful places. Some say he was Andrew Tate before Andrew Tate, but Dan Bilzerian says that Henry VIII, Arthur at the Round Table, Elvis Presley. History and popular culture has given us many famous kings, none of them quite like Dan Bilzerian, known to millions of people as the king of Instagram. A superstar poker player, he racked up a vast following by documenting his unfettered hedonism, a lifestyle of beautiful women on beautiful yachts and beautiful places. Some say he was Andrew Tate before Andrew Tate, but Dan Bilzerian says that life is behind him now. The king is dead. He's back with a new outlook, a new agenda, and some very controversial opinions. So Dan Bilzerian, first of all, welcome to Uncensored. I kind of feel if I'd interviewed you 4 years ago, we'd have had a very different interview. You're at the height of your kind of hedonistic Instagram life. There were women everywhere, yachts everywhere, guns everywhere, drugs everywhere. It was a very different lifestyle to the one you have now. So my first question is, who is the new Dan Bilzerian, and why have you given up the other guy?
Well, I think I took hedonism to the end of the earth, and I just realized that it didn't bring me happiness. So I started focusing on things that I like to do, and did less of that.
I read that you were at your peak with the women, for example. If you only slept with 2 women a day, you thought that was a disappointing off day. And now you're down to just 1 woman. That's a pretty dramatic shift in your lifestyle, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, it was up to 9 at one day at one point, and it was just, it was a lot. I think a lot of that is probably fueled by insecurity from high school, not getting as many women as I wanted, and like I said, I just kind of took the pleasure seeking to the end of the earth, and with pleasure, I think it's kind of functions like a drug to where you need more to get the same feeling, and then eventually you have to do it to not feel like shit, and so, yeah, I just cut off the hedonism.
You even disappeared from Instagram for nearly a year. You only came back in May. Why did you do that? What was going on in your world in that period?
Well, I mean, I was writing a book. I think that was a, big focus, and that took a lot of time. And then I was just pretty much over it. I looked at social media like a video game that I beat and that, everybody else wanted to play, and I was just kind of tired of playing. And the only reason I really came back was because I felt like I had this big platform, and I really disagreed with what was going on in Israel, that we were funding this genocide. And so I felt like I had an obligation to use my platform to say what I, thought was right.
So, first of all, I got respect for this guy because he's a straight talker. He's not fluffing his words. He's being very, very straight. He's gone straight to genocide, and we all know that it's a genocide. I mean, you can't slaughter hordes of women and children like shooting fish in a fish pond You can't justify that in any manner. But they try. And the main argument, I think, is a sign of the times and the sign of the delusion that some people are under, that this could even possibly work as an excuse, is that literally all of them are protecting terrorists and harboring terrorists in the basement. That's a key argument, right? Key argument in why you're slaughtering so many people, right? Why you're slaughtering so many women and children. And okay, maybe a 5-year-old or an 8-year-old might buy this sort of nonsense that every single person, right, every woman and child that's been slaughtered by Israel is harboring terrorists in the basement, right? Or the terrorists are using them as human shields. Every single one. Right? That sort of narrative is just nonsense. I mean, only, to me, the most, like, literally lowest common denominator on the IQ scale is going to buy that. So I always find it super rich when they use that excuse. But I digress. I like the way he's speaking here. He's super direct. He's brought the genocide up straight away, so going straight to the jugular, if you will. Not Piers Morgan's jugular, but, you know, the central thing of the narrative here. So let's have a look and see what else we got.
I'm going to come to Israel because you've said a lot of controversial things about that war. But before we get there, I just want to explore a little bit more your decision to kind of renounce the king lifestyle. And I think I'm right in saying that you kind of worked out, you can have all the money in the world, but ultimately, if you don't work out what actually makes you happy, you're not going to be happy. Did you work out, other than not leading life to excess, did you work out the little things in life that actually made you happy?
Yeah, and I found that most of them didn't require that much money. You know, surfing, hanging out with my friends, working out, you know, just doing things that I like to do, you know, physically, and, you know, playing cards, whatever. Just none of it really required that much money, and I found that I was chasing a lot of these things that didn't really make me happy, and so I just cut it off.
How?
That's important. All right, that's important because I, for one, have been pursuing money quite a lot recently. But honestly, I've been in points where I've got literally zero money in any bank account. And it really brings home to me how rich I am when that distraction is removed, with my daughters, with my family, my mother and father, my brothers and sisters, my wife. Honestly, they're my riches, so I completely agree with him, and I like the fact that he's communicating this to the audience, because a lot of people can get a little bit starstruck by all the glitz and the glamour, but what most people, I don't think, realize when they deify these types of people, these hedonists, if you will. Didn't realize that was the word for it, or whether it was a thing, that's something you could commit to. But yeah, it's excellent to hear someone just being so clear about the fact that money's not the route to happiness. In fact, it seems to have been the route to excess for Dan. So let's continue on and see what else he has to say.
How rich are you?
Depending on the value of my company on any given day, probably $200 to $300 million.
I mean, that's a staggering amount of money, and yet you kind of worked out money doesn't buy you happiness. Does it buy you like security? Is that the best thing about money, that you don't have to worry about money?
Yeah, and I think freedom as well. Freedom's a big piece of it. Not having to answer to anybody, being able to say what you believe, and not have to worry about paying bills and those sort of things. I think that's one of the biggest things that money gives you. And like I said, the freedom to do what you want. But as far as like material things, I think you get pretty tired of it pretty quick. And yeah, I just don't really give a shit.
I mean, it's a fascinating change in your life. There'll be some skeptics who go, well, he doesn't really mean this. He'll be back doing the other stuff before long. This is just a stunt because he's an Instagram guy. Why wouldn't it be? What do you say to that?
I'm calling it now. This is going to be...
Well, I mean, I've pretty much stopped posting on Instagram. I haven't.
Be back doing the other stuff before long. This is just a stunt because he's an Instagram guy. Why wouldn't it be? What do you say to that?
Isn't that funny? Right? Isn't that funny that Piers raises that as if there's some sort of hierarchical structure to the truth, right? And you know, we have a lot of people breaking into the alternative news, if you will. We also have the gatekeepers, okay? We've got Russell Brand, we've got Joe Rogan, we've got Jordan Peterson, Israel Warhawk, we've got, you know, Ben Shapiro. Some of these guys that are sort of breaking into having their own channels. But what is the measurement? And who made? And who made the measurement? Who gets to judge? Because I think we can all agree by now, those that don't have mass psychosis, mass formation psychosis, which is a real disease, right? And I have observed this commonly. The examples are all out there. But who has the authority on the truth? Is it the Associated Press, who've completely lost the confidence of the public? Is it the government, who have completely lost the confidence of the public? I just want to know who Piers is talking about here when he talks about people, and why they have the right to pass judgment. Let's see what else is said here, because this is an important interview for me.
Well, I mean, I've pretty much stopped posting on Instagram. I haven't posted much in 4 years. And like I said, I don't really care that much about social media except for, you know, speaking about things that I think the world needs to hear and that a lot of people are scared to say.
Well, let's talk about some of that, because you've been very vocal about Israel in particular. You know, even when Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, was killed by the IDF, you were out lauding him as a hero. You know, to most people, he's the despicable head of a terrorist organization that perpetrated on October the 7th one of the worst terror attacks in modern history in particular.
Here we go.
You know, even when Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, was killed by the IDF, you were out lauding him as a hero. You know, to most people, he's the despicable head of a terrorist organization that perpetrated on October the 7th one of the worst terror attacks in modern history. What's heroic about that?
Well, I think...
Bit extreme, Piers. Bit extreme, mate. I mean, like, we know it was a terror attack, right? One of the worst in history. We've been over that. You know, so he's going with this angle again, where he wants Dan to condemn this act. Right? Very, very clever boy, Piers. Look, I'm not saying that it wasn't a terror attack. I'm not saying that it wasn't a serious attack, but one of the worst terrorist attacks of all time. Are we leaving out war criminals and leaders like Pol Pot who killed millions? Why do we have to have this kind of terrorist thing when, you know, like we have to be very specific that it's a terrorist attack, right? So that we always complete the narrative, which is that the Palestinians are terrorists, they're supported by terrorists, and as long as we have that line that they're terrorists, there's a lot of people out there who can't critically think enough and can't get past that line, right? I was one of them. I remember when we saw 9/11 and my mate Alex called me and said, turn on the TV. I was addicted to that TV for days. And I wanted literally every terrorist and anyone who had anything to do with them absolutely wiped off the face of the map. That was my position back then. My position is obviously a lot different now. To me, 9/11, at very least, the official story is absolute garbage. We know that 9/11 had less. The investigation had less money spent on it than when Bill Clinton was investigated for his lewd acts with Monica Lewinsky, which people tend to forget as soon as you become a former president, and then they kind of deify you as such. People want to say this guy is one of the best presidents ever, things like that. The fact is, he was taking sexual favours off of staff, and that's a pretty severe character flaw. But he was married to Hillary Clinton. Let's not forget that, which is, again, mate, who knows what he had to suffer in the background. I mean, to me, they're both psychopaths, but hey, you could almost excuse him when you got a wife like Hillary. Okay. Anyway, let's continue on with this.
I think when you look at it in a vacuum, it's a very different picture. It's kind of like if I...
This is really important.
You were out lauding him as a hero. To most people, he's the despicable head of a terrorist organisation that perpetrated on October the 7th one of the worst terror attacks in modern history. What's heroic about that?
Well, I think when you look at it in a vacuum, it's a very different picture. It's kind of like if I, raped your mother and I kicked you in the nuts 3 times and then you punched me in the face and everybody just wanted to focus on you punching me in the face. I think that would be a very different conversation than when you looked at it, the whole of what happened. And the whole of what happened was Nakba. That's where it started. You have 750,000 Palestinians that got displaced. And then you've got multiple, acts of terror, in my opinion, on Israel's side that would make October 7th look like nothing. So to me, I think it was a retaliation, and I think that Hamas is a resistance organization, and I think that Israel is a terrorist.
When did Israel...
Right. Again, love the way this guy just doesn't mince words. I love how calm he is, how he retains his composure for this whole interview, right? And Piers is very, very clever at inciting people, right? But he just isn't getting much off Dan here because Dan is literally keeping to the point. He's making his points super clear, and of course he's made a fantastic point, okay? Literally the only difference between Israel and what they're doing, butchering women and children, slaughtering them like fish in a fish pond, and Hamas is the word terrorist, okay? And the narrative that seems to be mixed in with the American people, that somehow these are God's people and somehow they are merged with the future of Christianity. Alright? So, this is one of the greatest aberrations of all time that I can see in the USA. And I've watched the propaganda and how they try and literally intertwine, right, Judaism to be Judeo-Christianism or whatever it may be, and Christianity. Now, let me make a very, very clear point here, okay? Israel's people murdered Jesus Christ, right? They murdered him, okay? Their book their Bible, right, does not care a single thing about Jesus. And on the other hand, Christianity is everything is centered around Jesus. So really need to make a point here that my position is that if you are convoluting Christianity with Judaism, you have never read the Bible, and you have no idea what you're talking about, because all you're doing is lapping up propaganda that makes no logical sense whatsoever. Okay, on one hand you've got Jesus, who is there to save all Gentiles and Jews and things like that, right? And then you've got Judaism, which if you read the Talmud and read it yourself, and he'll go into it here, they're on two opposite ends of the spectrum. Their paths are not aligned, right? It's very, very clearly written. So this is one of the things that I find really difficult to grasp about America and how they seem to back Israel. You know, the people, I'm not talking about the government here, I'm talking about the people seem to really feel like Israel is part of Christianity. And maybe God said, these are my people in the Old Testament, but that God was a psychopath. That God was wiping out cities. He was extremely jealous, raging God, demanded human sacrifice from the people who followed him. And that's not nice. Like, would we as people be okay with human sacrifice? I don't think we would. Anyway, let's go.
They'll kill 1,200 people in a single day and wound nearly 7,000.
Well, I mean, you have, Nakba, there was, 15,000 people killed during Nakba. I mean, there was Sabra and Shatia. I mean, that was 3,500 civilians. Then you have 2014, they killed 1,500 civilians. 500 plus were kids. I mean, so any one of those days would have been much worse than October 7th, but nobody really talks about
those
that.
didn't happen in a single
And October
day.
7th is not nearly as bad.
Look how he tries to trivialize this. This is what irritates me about Piers. Okay, he's not gonna move past this quickly because he wants, he's trivializing it, right? He's saying that no, I'm talking about in a single day. So these are the terrorists because they did a lot of people in a single day, but Israel are not terrorists because they didn't do 1,000 people in one day. So they could have done 30,000 people in 10 days or in 60 days, and Piers wants to make a real distinction there. And I just think that this is a nonsense argument from Piers, who's an intelligent person, that he's trivializing this to the point where he wants to make this about how many people were killed in one day. Why? Why is he doing that? Why is he saying that? Why is this particular point that they killed more people in one day so important to this conversation? It's because he wants Dan to condemn this. But why is his focus on only condemning this?
Is what they say.
Well, those didn't happen in single days, as you know.
Well, I mean, you have, Sabra and Shatia, that was 3,500 people, so that was basically 7 October 7th, and October 7th, I think the numbers get inflated a lot too, because you're not taking into account that it was only 650 civilians, and there was the Hannibal Directive that was employed, and the Hannibal Directive is when the military is basically killing civilians so that they aren't taken as hostages, and that had to be hundreds of people, so I would argue that it was less than 500 civilians that were killed, and to me, that is much less than what, the Israelis have been doing to the Palestinians.
But you said
Let's have a look at this. I want to know what the Hannibal Directive is. So I want to, usually I just ask ChatGPT what the Hannibal Directive is. So let's see what he has to say today. Whoa, shit. Whoa. Whoa. So, the first thing is it's a real thing. The Hannibal Directive refers to a controversial Israeli military protocol established in 1986 during Israel's conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Its purpose was to prevent the capture of Israeli soldiers by enemy forces at all costs, including extreme measures to stop a soldier from being taken alive. Now, I would love to hear in the comments who on the Israel side of the argument knew about the Hannibal Directive. This is the first time I heard of it, and I thought I was reasonably well read in this thing. But, you know, to put it in short, it means that if they think that their soldiers are going to be abducted and held prisoner, that Israeli soldiers will shoot their own men. They will murder their own men. Now, this narrative is never ever raised in public discourse of the Associated Press. So this is a really critical point to understand, because Piers is trying to, you know, talk about numbers, and I'm not saying he's inflating them or he's deflating them, but this is a critical point that most people don't know, is that Israel will murder their own soldiers to avoid them being captured. That's a critical point when you're talking about 1,000 people murdered in one day. Let's go on.
Even the year of the year when October 7th happened, they had killed hundreds of Palestinians that year. It was the bloodiest year for kids. So that was that was a reply to what had been happening.
But when you say that October the 7th wasn't as bad as people have said, what do you mean by that? Because
look what he's doing, okay? Again, right? Piers, he can't move past this. He cannot move past it. He will not move past it. He will continue to revert back to it. Okay? He will not allow the conversation to evolve outside of this, without a good fight, or without someone just literally accepting what he's saying. So, Piers needs to be educated too, right? It seems to me like, even though Piers Morgan is gone to uncensored, that he still has some very, very mainstream kind of blind spots when he's talking to people about this stuff. Look, I like the guy. I watch all his shows. Like, I really enjoy watching his shows, okay? But I don't like this, because this is not helpful. This is not this is not bridging the gap. This is not allowing the conversation to flourish. It's literally, kind of railroading the conversation to being all about the terrorist attacks.
from Hamas's own boasting through their GoPro cameras, they mutilated, burned alive, raped and abused, beheaded some people, set fire to homes, they kidnapped babies, they kidnapped Holocaust survivors, grandparents. They did just about every act of depravity it is possible to do. And they didn't just do it, they gleefully posted it on social media and the internet so that we could all watch in real time the horrors that they were perpetrating. It's hard to imagine a more horrific act than what happened that day. Why would you try to downplay it?
To me, I'll be like, I'm not downplaying it. It's absolutely disgusting. Can we move on now, Piers? But let's see what Dan has to say.
Well, I mean, there was only 2 babies killed from what I was told, and one was in the hospital, and the other one was shot by a bullet. There was no babies in ovens. There was no, beheaded people that I saw. The rapes were disproven. So all that was Israeli propaganda. And the problem is Israel has continued to lie and lie and lie, and they've been caught lying. And they're the only ones that have actually been caught red-handed raping prisoners. And they've done it, and the people that raped the prisoners were now heroes, and they got released, and there was nothing that happened to them. So I think it's very hypocritical to focus on things that they're doing and then try and blame them, on Hamas or the Palestinians.
It's interesting because...
So this is another thing I want to mention, right, is that, literally both of these guys now, are just making statements. Okay, they're making statements because a statement is nothing without being backed by sources. So, when I'm speaking about an argument or having an argument, or a discussion, let's not call it an argument because people want to focus on it being an argument. That's why people get all heightened. That's why we're not allowed to talk about religion. We're not allowed to talk about politics, okay, because we're too stupid, right, mentally and emotionally, to be able to have those conversations at the dinner table without turning into raving lunatics at each other. And believe me, I've been there, right? I've been there, okay? I have had those conversations myself, and I've got very, very passionate to the point where I was blind about what I was talking about. But I just want to re-emphasize here that, to me, when people are making statements, they should be backed by some sort of source and fact. You can cite that when you're talking. You can say, well, the rapes were, disproven according to this particular article on this particular date, which has backed by its own sources, right? People making statements, right, just for the hell of making statements, that's all they're making is statements, right? And they're asking people to buy into an emotional narrative on that, okay? There's a lot of facts to be checked here, right? There's a lot of facts to be checked on Dan's side and on Piers' side, okay? Just because Piers said it doesn't mean that it happened. Just because Dan said it doesn't mean that it happened, right? It is our responsibility as critical thinking human beings who are participating in making the world a better place, and I'm going to emphasize participating, okay? Because to me, right, people who are participating in the discourse, no matter if they're having an absolute psychotic episode, to me are far more courageous than those who say, look, I don't want to go there, right? Live life, be happy, frog in a boiling pot, okay? Those types of people are just allowing shit to happen, right? And thinking, well, I'm going to die when I'm 70 or 80 or 110, whatever it may be, right? And my children can deal with that. I've had people say that to me before, right? I don't care, don't want to know about it, okay? To me, people who say, I don't care, I don't want to know about it, I can't deal with them, okay? Because we are all contributing to the future that we want, and for us to be able to have our voices heard, we need to be participating in the conversation respectfully, right? Even though it might be embarrassing or it might be controversial, right? And other people might disagree with us. But why can't we just respectfully disagree? Anyway, I reiterate my point that right now there's just a bunch of statements being thrown out here, okay? I'm not going to go fact check every single one, right? But to me, this is how the discourse descends into emotional diatribes and rhetoric and propaganda, right? Because it's just two opinions coming at each other. We're not checking sources at any point in this conversation.
To me, total bullshit. It's just Israeli propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, listen, many people will listen to you and think that what you're spewing is bullshit propaganda from the other side. And the reason I say that is you say there was no raping or abuse of women, and yet the UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict, Pramila Patten, reported in March this year that there was clear and convincing information that Israeli hostages in Gaza experienced sexual violence, including rape, sexualized torture and cruel.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the UN here. Who here thinks that the UN is a good entity? Right? The UN has zero power. The UN is not a policeman. They very rarely get involved in things. And all they ever do with this Palestinian Jewish conflict, right, is put it up for a vote. Vote for Palestinian independence. What happens every time? Two countries veto the vote. America and Israel. Okay? This is an organization, right, that is meant to be holding countries accountable because they're at the round table, right, and everyone has a vote. And it's not just the USA and Israel, okay? Russia and China veto other votes all the time. So this is not a Western problem, but I just draw into question why the UN would be a trusted source when they have literally created the rules that allow these countries to veto any attempt at peace, any attempt at a two nation state or whatever it might be. Okay, the UN is not doing a good job, right? The UN is talking about, is allowing US to veto and Israel to veto the votes for peace and for a two-state solution. So how do they have any moral authority whatsoever? This is not an organization that is doing the right thing. They're not even an organization that has any power. Okay? And I want to go back to the Syria conflict, right? And the white helmets. And I encourage you to look into alternative sources and make your own conclusions about the white helmets. Okay? But the basic thing was that these guys were a propaganda arm for the US government's proxy armies, right? And there's a very, Piers is trying to use the UN as an authority, right? But again, this authority has no authority. And I question their humanity as well, because this organization that has no authority over countries and seems to be heavily emphasizing what's happened to the Israelis, well, I would expect a report from the other end as well for a fair analysis and for a fair point of view, as an objective point of view, wouldn't you? Well, let's see if Piers goes into that.
Inhumane and degrading treatment, and reasonable grounds to believe such abuse is ongoing. There was also reasonable grounds to believe that...
Reasonable grounds. That's not evidence. It's just not evidence, okay? Reasonable grounds is a statement. He's reading a statement out of the Associated Press, okay? The Associated Press are well known for pushing a narrative. There's huge amounts of evidence out there of them saying the same thing at the same time, right, on 50, 60 different channels, because they are the Associated Press. Okay. Another important thing about the Associated Press is that these types, Reuters, whoever it may be, right, and Reuters is a good one because they just screwed up the reporting on the Maccabi, Palestinian conflict over there in Holland. Right, they were putting image and footage, and this was widely spread, footage of Maccabi Israeli supporters attacking Islamist supporters or Palestinian supporters. But when they dug down to the truth and when it came out, the footage was actually of Israeli people attacking Palestinians. It wasn't, so they were, and they'd flipped it and said this was Italians attacking Israelis, right? So that's gone out to a massive amount of people, huge audience, right? People heavily emotionally charged who are looking at something that is Israel attacking Palestine And the narrative is saying that that's actually Palestine attacking Israel. And it comes out in the wash, right? And there's a few apologies and stuff like that. Bit of embarrassing stuff. Maybe they'll make a small report about it on the Associated Press. But don't you think that's quite a serious thing? Like, how has the Associated Press, and like not just one organisation, but multiple organisations, put that footage up, which is fraudulent and wrong? How has that happened in a free press? Okay, this is not a free press, right? We all know that advertisers are the ones that pay these organisations, right? These organisations survive off advertising. The people who are pouring millions into advertising, for instance, like Bill Gates, control the narrative. Okay? And when someone like Bill Gates controls the narrative, you can definitely conclude you're dealing with a corrupt organisation who is literally a PR front for people in power. Right? And Piers is parroting this off at the moment.
Conflict-related sexual violence occurred during the 7th of October attacks in multiple locations across Gaza periphery, including rape and gang rape in at least 3 locations. So when you
Pretty strong language, but no sources, right? It's just read it off of a UN thing, okay? And saying that there's reasonable evidence to assume that this has happened. Well, no, there's no reasonable evidence, Piers. You've just basically parroted something off of a paper in front of you, right? And you haven't mentioned any sources or anything that we can go and watch to verify that claim.
say it didn't happen, what you're really saying is you think that the United Nations report into all this, which established it absolutely did happen and was horrific, is what? Is a pack of lies? And if so, why would the United Nations lie?
Look, I wasn't there, but I have, seen articles that said that it did not happen. So, if it did happen, that's terrible, and I think that's, atrocious. I don't ever believe in rape, but during Sabra and Shatia, there was a girl raped in front of her father, and that's happened on the other side numerous times. I mean, it happened in the prison. I mean, they were literally rioting because they felt like they had the right to rape these prisoners. So to me, I think it's a bit hypocritical. You can't believe that you have the right.
Honestly, First of all, guys, like, what kind of sick fuck just wants to put his dick into a fucking ass or a pussy, right, just because he hates someone? Like, that is perverted, right? It's perverted, okay? It doesn't matter what side you're on, right? I do not associate with anyone that randomly and excessively puts their penises into ass and pussies regardless of what they're doing, okay? But these are people, soldiers, right, that feel like this is their right to go and rape people. I don't care if you're right. It's just weird, right? It's just weird. It's just fucked in the head, right? Like, you have to be fucked in the head, right, to be such a hateful person, right, and to be so, like, taken over by propaganda and lies and just a one-eyed perspective, right, that you're justifying and you're looking forward to and getting enjoyment out of putting your penis into the enemy's asshole and vagina, right? So you despise these people, but you weirdly want to have this kind of weird intercourse with them. Like, this is sick, right? It doesn't matter what side you're on. It's sick, okay? Like, if you are fighting in the army and you think that raping is fun or in some way promotes justice and bettering the world, you're sick in the head, okay? It's not an argument. It's a non-argument, okay? Right? Don't you have enough stuff to worry about as a soldier, like getting your head shot off, that you want to actually go in and actually, have more drama and do weird sexual acts with people that you find are the enemy, okay? It's a weird power structure of a psychopath, okay? Normal human beings just don't operate like that. They do not behave in that manner. So Dan raises it, and Piers is probably going to trivialize it. Okay, so let's find out how Piers takes this information. Okay, again though, these are statements, right? We don't know if it's the truth unless we ourselves verify the information on both ends. We cannot do that without a subjective mindset, and we definitely can't do that if we think there's any justification or anything normal about rape. Doesn't matter what side you're on, it's not normal. Okay, psychopaths rape other people. Okay, not normal people.
Right to rape prisoners and then complain about them raping, your civilians as well. So I don't think it just can only go one way. I think it's atrocious on both sides.
You said Hamas are not terrorists, they're an army fighting for their country against the worst terror organization on the planet. And yet Hamas were given power in Gaza in 2000.
This is where I think Dan falls down, okay? Because, like, these terrorists... Sorry, I just completely lost my train of thought there. Let me go back to this for a sec.
They were given billions of dollars.
So I don't think it just can only go...
I'd never say Hamas were heroes, okay? I would say that they're a necessary evil that's been created from the oppression of a people for decades and decades, from the slaughter of people from decades and decades. Okay, these people have nothing. They don't have water, right? They don't have good food, right? The entire, economy and industrial complex is absolutely destroyed. There's no infrastructure, right? So what do desperate people do? Okay, and this was an argument, this is what really changed, my perspective on this. My sister Doris actually told me to check into Zionism. One day I was like literally ranting because I wanted Israel to kill everyone. Okay, obviously don't feel like that now. In fact, I think that this country is probably the reason the world is still at war. Okay, they just have too much influence, and the influence goes. You can verify that for yourself. But this is where Dan falls down. He's not. He's not. And I'm almost ashamed to say this is he's not socially acceptable enough. He doesn't clarify his point enough here. He's just a very blunt speaker. Sometimes that can work against you.
One way. I think it's atrocious on both sides.
You said Hamas are not terrorists, they're an army fighting for their country against the worst terror organization in Gaza in 2005.
Your civilians as well. So I don't think it just can only go one way. I think it's atrocious on both sides.
You said Hamas are not terrorists, they're an army fighting for their country against the worst terror organization on the planet. And yet Hamas were given power in Gaza in 2005. They were given billions of dollars, a lot of it in a very suspect manner by Benjamin Netanyahu and his government, because he wanted to create a rift between Palestinian groups, and I completely accept that. But there's no doubt from what has now emerged that Hamas spent most of that money not on benefiting the lives of Palestinian people in Gaza, but on building an elaborate tunnel system and arming themselves to the teeth so that they could perpetrate this act of horror on October the 7th in a strike against Israel that they hope would decapitate Israel. I'm just curious why you would go out of your...
What absolute nonsense. Okay, absolute nonsense, Piers. Right, the hope that they would decapitate Israel, one of the most powerful military organization countries in the planet, backed by America, and Hamas is going to kill 1,000 people and decapitate Israel. That's not even remotely possible, okay? These guys are fighting with toy rockets and tunnels and sticks and stones and other guns that they get very likely from an American manufacturer, okay? So they're not going to decapitate Israel. The only thing that will decapitate Israel is the public, is you and I continually refusing the narrative, questioning the narrative, saying that it's not okay to rape prisoners, not okay to butcher people like fish in a pond. Okay? We the people need to be talking about that. Alright? And we the people have the power to switch off nonsense propaganda that's so basic and obvious. And what I can't understand is how anyone in the world can't see that. Right? This is why I think people have mass formation psychosis. Because if you cannot open yourself, and I'm probably had it before myself, okay? You can't open yourself up to a subjective point of view. So you're buying in to these sensationalist language that Piers is using for a very deliberate manner. Then you're not a very clever person.
Your way. Now you say you've read things, but you're a guy of big influence. You've got a big following, 30-odd million people on Instagram.
Well, I mean, Piers is saying he's read things too. He's just citing the UN as a source, right? Which is, I don't think, a very good source. Other people might beg to differ, but I think that they're not a very good source. Okay, so Piers is doing the same thing here. But the worst is he's parroting, right, the narrative. He's parroting the narrative that Jordan Peterson wants to parrot, that Ben Shapiro wants to parrot, that Douglas Murray, and I have a special dislike for Douglas Murray because I cannot stand well-spoken British people who keep a total load of composure when they're speaking, and therefore they sound like an aristocrat. And that anyone who doesn't agree with them and the facts that they're presenting are just morons. Like, he literally acts like that. You got to check the guy out. But for me, he's one of the most disingenuous guys on the planet, except for Sam Harris.
With respect, and I say this respectfully, I understand why you want to support the Palestinian cause, and I'm sure there'll be many points of agreement we would have on that. But just to say, well, I read somewhere there were no rapes and abuse, it doesn't seem to me like you've really studied, or perhaps don't even want to study, the facts about all this, because it would go against your own narrative. Would that be fair?
Now, Piers is really looking for Dan to concede here in some way, right? This is where Piers starts getting a little bit, I think he starts getting a little bit flustered. Others might say he's getting a little bit shocked, okay? But he changes after a while here.
I mean, look, I got no dog in this fight, Piers. I'm not Palestinian. I'm not Muslim. I'm just saying what I believe is right. And let's just say there was rapes. I mean, I think that's terrible. But like I said, they are, an occupied state, and they're operating in apartheid. So when you are kept in an open-air prison, there's going to be resistance. And how that resistance manifests itself is, it's going to be violent eventually. I mean, if you kill enough people and you take enough land and you treat people like second-class citizens, and and you're stealing land in the West Bank, and you're just basically encroaching these people's human rights on a daily basis, there's going to be repercussions. So I'm not going to be the judge or jury, and I'm not going to condemn these people for fighting back. I think nobody had an issue with South African apartheid and their resistance, so I don't know why there's an issue with the resistance in the clear apartheid that's going on here.
You went on.
They also called God, I always forget his name. Hang on. This is my short-term memory just playing up. Nelson Mandela. Sorry. They called Nelson Mandela a terrorist. He was a terrorist. He was jailed for being a terrorist.
Apache Bet Davis podcast, he's a friend of this show, you said the Jews killed JFK and that Israel wanted October the 7th to happen so that Israel, had a reason to take the land. Let's just discuss those two things. What do you mean the Jews killed JFK?
This is important. This is really, really important. I'm going to tell you why in a second, okay?
So I believe that was an Israeli Mossad operation, and they've committed multiple false flag attacks. I mean, they've, the USS Liberty, you've got the Levin affair. I mean, so they've got a history of doing this, and I don't think it's crazy.
Wait. let's fact check this. Hang on.
Let's just discuss those two things. What do you mean the Jews killed JFK?
So I believe that was an Israeli Mossad operation, and they've committed multiple false flag attacks. I mean, the USS Liberty. You've got the.
So, I'm not putting conspiracy theories in there, okay? Like, I'm just going to put theories because there's absolutely no difference between a conspiracy theory and a theory, all right? There's a theory is that, someone takes a position based on, it's evidence, right? And there's a little bit of, wiggle room in terms of interpretation, things like that. But to me, there's no difference between a conspiracy theory, when, effectively police, lawyers, private investigators are conspiracy theorists, if you will, because they're looking for facts that don't match the official narrative, okay? Because someone's lying. What happened here anyway? Oh yeah. Well, critics argue that Israel intentionally targeted Liberty to prevent it from intercepting sensitive communications related to the ongoing war, such as preparations for a ground assault on Golan Heights and alleged war crimes against Egyptian prisoners of war. Right, it goes on quite a bit here. Okay, I mean, there's a lot here. There's a lot here. Thanks, Mr. GPT. And what was the other thing that he was talking about? I want to hear.
Levin affair. I mean, so they've got a.
Levin affair. What happened was, it's not saying what possibly happened, it's saying this actually happened, right? Israel military intelligence recruited a group of Egyptian Jews to carry out sabotage attacks in Egypt. The targets included American and British civilian and cultural institutions such as libraries and cinemas. The goal was to create tension between Egypt and Western powers, making Egypt appear unstable and unreliable as a partner. Again, this is sick. Okay, this is politics that most human beings don't play. Right? This is big boys stuff that everyone thinks is down to the big boys. This is just disgusting, sick, twisted behavior of basically murdering American and Egyptian citizens for their own agenda. That's sick, isn't it not? Sick. Anyway, it looks like he's telling the truth there.
A history of doing this, and I don't think it's crazy to think that they were involved in that assassination, and that's the reason that Trump didn't want to, release those files. And I think clearly it had to be embarrassing. Otherwise, why wouldn't he want to release it? And that's the only thing that I could think of that would be embarrassing, because everybody from that time is pretty much dead by now. So it would make sense. I mean, they wanted to cut off, it's now AIPAC, but the Zionist, organization that was doing all the funding that should have been registered as a foreign entity, and he wanted to register them under FARA. He wanted to, take away their ability to have nukes, and they didn't like that. So I believe that they killed JFK.
But just to be clear, you have absolutely no evidence that any Jews killed JFK, do you? Nothing.
Well, I mean, that's not true. I mean,
I'm gonna check this one out. So let's have a look. The theory that Israel's intelligence agency Mossad was involved in an assassination attempt of President John F. Kennedy is a fringe hypothesis lacking mainstream historical acceptance. Okay, this theory primarily revolves around Kennedy's alleged opposition to Israel's nuclear ambitions and is based on circumstantial evidence and speculative connections. Below are the key points often cited to support this theory. Right, so you can make your decision either way. Okay, but I guess that is a pretty big claim. It's not something that I've heard of before. So you make of that what you will.
Jack Rubenstein, that was the person that killed the supposed Patsy Lee Harvey Oswald. I mean, he was a Jewish mob guy. And, there's been numerous documentaries tying the, Jewish mafia, the CIA. I mean,
I'm going to stop it there, all right? I'm going to stop it there because it's my first ever video. It's gone for, I don't know, a very long time, almost an hour. No one's going to watch the whole thing for an hour. I'm going to shorten these up in the future. But I do encourage you to have a look at this interview yourself. Go and look at it with an open mind. The one final thing I will say, where kind of Dan loses credibility, is that he does not make a distinction between Jews and Zionists. Okay, Jews are people. Jews live normally. They live amongst us. Okay. We all know what happened in the Holocaust. They've been through a lot. Right? Jewish people are different to Zionists. Okay, Jewish people, they might be a little bit blinded by government propaganda, and they might have bought into this whole narrative a bit too much, being that they are, usually touted as God's people and things like that. But we have the Jewish People for Peace. We have a lot of organizations in Israel where Jews are doing good work, all right? Zionists, okay, are the ones doing the bad stuff, okay? Zionists believe in the greater Israel movement. Zionists are the ones that are, controlling Bibi Netanyahu. And how the fuck, by the way, has this guy got a goddamn nickname, right? He is a psychopath. He is a murderer. He's a goddamn animal who doesn't hide it. He doesn't hide how much he hates Palestinians, right? So this guy's a psycho. Why has he been given a nickname? Anyway, I'm going to end it there, all right? I encourage you to watch the rest of the interview. Look, I have lots of time for Piers Morgan. I will continue to watch him. I don't think he's done a good job here, and I think Dan has not helped himself either by not making that distinction between Jews and Zionists. It's two different things, right? You need to look into Zionists to figure out the deeper roots to these conflicts, right? And you cannot say that all Jews are Zionists, okay? Because there's, like I said, a lot of good Jews in the world doing a lot of good things, all right? But there is a distinction that there are Jews and then there are Zionists. And the Zionists are the psychos, and I encourage you to look into that and see their roots in communism, see their roots in Marxism, see their roots in the banking system, right? These guys are the problem, the Zionists, okay? Not the Jews, not Jewish people. Hope you guys have got a little bit out of this analysis today. I hope this encourages you to fact check people yourself. Do not rely on fact checkers, okay, because you're not smart enough or you're too stupid to fact check things yourself, right? You can check sources, you can critically think where people have different agendas. You are smart enough, okay? You do not need fact checkers. I hope that by sharing this interview with my community, that this will increase public awareness around that difference between Zionism and Jewish people, and also increase a little bit of awareness about the fact that, unless you're backing stuff up with actual hard evidence, everything that you say is a statement. And it doesn't matter if it's the UN, it doesn't matter if you're Barack Obama, Doesn't matter if you're Donald Trump. Doesn't matter if you're Noam Chomsky. Doesn't matter if you're a Nobel Prize winner, right? There are statements that are made for the purpose of propaganda, sensationalism, and making people operate in a certain manner, right? And then there are arguments based on verifiable fact, okay? And then once you get to the verifiable fact, you've got to verify the sources of that verifiable fact. This, when you are trying to review something critically, you can't just go down one level, right? You have to go down 6 or 7 levels, right? I hope this encourages people to think more critically. I hope this encourages people to make the distinction between Jews and Zionists. I hope this encourages people to make distinctions between the free press, the gatekeeper press, the David Icks of the world, right? Somewhere in there is the truth, okay? But I encourage you not to just buy into statements, because statements are just things that people say that have no backing behind them unless there is a cited source and fact. Thank you.